Breakfast show on Faith FM with Skafy and Elliot and producer Shell. Today is Wednesday, the 27th of May, 2026. And in today's show, we are going to be looking at an easy way to develop resilience in children. We're going to be talking about the battle about who's right about the Antichrist, Pope Leo or the tech bros. We're also going to be having an interview with Maria Andrioli about OCD. What is OCD and what OCD is not? Everybody heard about it.
Fascinating.
That's going to be a very interesting topic. He's going to be exploring with us. And finally, at our third hour, we are going to be looking at God's law in the context of growing in a relationship with Christ. The importance of God's law. This is the Bible study that Mr. Elliot is going to be bringing to us later today in the show. Cannot wait for that one. But before we talk about resilience and kids, we're going to see if Producer Shell can give us a Bible verse that will grow us more resilient in our Bible knowledge.
A Bible verse or just
a Bible question? Bible
Okay,
question that hopefully is based on a Bible verse that hopefully will grow up,
much so.
grow our resilience.
It's coming from Revelation 18:4.
Okay, that's a solid one. Solid chapter.
What call or plea is given in that verse concerning Babylon the Great? What call or plea is given in that verse concerning Babylon the Great in Revelation 18:4? What are we told? We have a correct answer from Skafy. Well done. 0491 064 669. We have two correct answers in studio, so send in what you think the call or the plea is that's given to us in Revelation 18 and verse 4 concerning Babylon the Great.
There you go. I wasn't sure whether I was going to be right about that one or not, but thankfully I guessed right.
Yeah. Very good. Well, this is actually a Bible verse about resilience, all right? So that's right on the topic.
Bible verse about resilience.
Right on the topic, because you are going to be sharing with us how to make our kids more resilient. And actually you claim to fame is that you know a secret, easy way to do that.
Yeah, well, actually, this was fascinating. I was reading this article this morning. I was like, wow, there's a really easy way to make children more resilient as they grow up. Guess what the way is?
I don't know. Leave them outside of the house when it's raining and cold and then opening up in the morning, see if they're still there.
No, that'll
be very easy. They grew up in the
I think that's called abuse. That's not resilience.
This is what the one of the popes in medieval times did with one of the European kings, actually.
Really?
And he left them like begging outside for forgiveness for like 3 days or so.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. I think it was a German king and the pope was fleeing from him, but then the king realized, like, man, I'm losing all of my support here without the blessings of the pope. But anyway, of course, this is not the way to raise resilience. Don't do this.
Not the way to raise resilient
Don't do
kids.
this.
I'll tell you what the way that studies have shown. Research suggests that laughing is able to boost children's development, especially in making their brains resilient and more open to learning, which is actually really fascinating.
Right.
Laughing and humor. Who would have thought? Because you know how there's like the old saying, laughter is the best medicine.
Yeah.
You ever heard that? Well, actually, laughing and humor is actually very, very good for you in more ways than one. And that's what I thought was so fascinating about this article. It's saying that laughter is able to build deep emotional connections and actually soothe children's nervous system, which makes them more resilient. And so what's fascinating is laughter isn't just like a random thing, because some people think like, you know, why is it just, we just randomly laugh, you know? It's not like just something that happens out of nowhere, but no, actually it's
But what kind of laughter exactly? Like, should we just show them like comedy shows? Because let me tell you this, I think that one of the most resilient classes of people in the universe are soldiers. Yeah. And one of the things that soldiers do all the time when they are out and about, particularly in the middle of conflicts, is that they laugh a lot.
Yeah.
And they make fun of all the situations. Like they laugh off themselves all the time, and that's or they're making jokes about everything at all the time, and that's actually now a known coping mechanism to deal with stress. Like with unbearable stress, one of the best ways just just laugh about it.
Yeah. That's pretty much what this study was saying. Like there was this doctor named Dr. Jacqueline Harding, and she's done extensive research onto this kind of topic, like laughter as medicine, like how humor actually can play a role. And she found that, especially in kids, it contributes to healthy brain growth, it contributes to emotional well-being, and it also contributes to social bonding as well. Like it's an important part. Humor is actually an important part of healthy development in kids. Laughing and sharing in fun. And I would say it's a healthy development in adults as well. Because if you get someone that just like is always, grumpy, never laughs
very serious about everything,
never laughs about anything, then actually like that's not super enjoyable to be around. But the person who is always cracking jokes, making everyone laugh, making everyone feel good, everyone wants them around, So like it's actually a good social.
It's a good social. Look, there's a theologian that has this phrase. He says, "Look, always doubt the religion of a person who cannot have a good laugh."
That's interesting. I really like that. Actually,
yes.
I really like that. Well, this is what was, in this article, Jacqueline Harding was basically saying that laughing it engages multiple parts of the brain. So humor will actually engage multiple parts of the brain, including your motor skill areas and your prefrontal cortex. And it influences your heart rate, it influences respiration, and get this, actually helps in the production of antibodies. So when they say laughter is the best medicine, indeed, laughter is actually a very good medicine. It helps you produce antibodies which can fight off.
It's crazy.
Bacteria, can fight off sicknesses and all that kind of stuff. It strengthens your immune system, and it actually improves your memory as well. Believe it or not, laughing can improve.
I would
your
imagine
memory.
because you would remember if you had like something really funny that happened on your day.
Yeah.
You remember that way more than
it's true.
if something boring happened.
It's very like how often when you're reminiscing with someone, like if maybe you've got a friend you haven't seen for ages and you go, "Oh, remember that time when this thing happened?" And it was some really humorous event, like something that happened that was so funny. You remember when something went wrong or catastrophe or whatever, but it was just hilarious. Like often those are the things that we often reminisce about with people that we haven't seen for ages. Those funny events that it's like you just can't make this up, just hilarious things that happen.
That's nice.
That's kind of the stuff. What's so interesting is that humor actually is kind of like a mental workout. And the reason is because it challenges the brain to predict and resolve tension between conflicting ideas. And that actually is like a workout for your brain to like figure out. You have to try and predict what's going to happen or whatever. And all these things are happening to make something funny. It actually requires effort on the part of your brain, which I thought was really interesting. Like, works out your brain, works out your frontal lobes, works out your memory and all this kind of stuff.
But what about people that think that we never seen Jesus laughing, never seen Jesus smiling. We don't see anywhere saying that God is, there's some Bible passages, but not a lot, talking about God laughing. And sometimes when he's laughing, it's like kind of he's coughing at his enemies. So what would you say to a person that says, "Elliot, this is an absolute heresy. Jesus never laughed around. We shouldn't either."
Jesus never laughed around. We shouldn't either. I would say to that, here's my response to that.
But you have to say your response without laughing.
Okay, my
Just
response is, why do you think flatulence exists? Why do we fart? Why? Why? Because everyone laughs. It's always funny. People will always the history of time, God created us and every animal, not only us do we, but there's other animals that fart as well. And I just think like that has to be some kind of sense of humor from God, like the fact that actually happens. I think it's funny. But
okay, that's a good
I would
evidence.
also say we don't necessarily see records in the gospel of Jesus laughing, because I think, like it says at the end of John, in fact, I might even get this up here, but at the end of John, it basically says, like, all of these accounts, like, we've written down all this stuff that Jesus has done so that you may believe. Like,
yeah, it's kind of future, like this is. I could have written like billions of things about Jesus.
Yeah, it says here, verse 25 of John chapter 21, it says, and there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that were written. So it's like, the thing that's happening here is...
Yeah, just because it's not there doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Exactly. Doesn't mean
Yeah, look, I agree. I think it's a good point. I would also add to that evidence, and I'm on your field there. I think that Jesus had a great sense of humor, actually.
Yeah.
Well, because yes, the Bible tells us that Jesus was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief in Isaiah chapter 53. But it also says that because of the joy that was set before him, that he will see the results of his labor and he will be rejoice about it. So we see Jesus rejoicing a lot as well. So in rejoicing, when you're rejoicing, you're smiling. We see Jesus, for example, through I think that his parables are the best way to see that, because some of his parables would have been hilarious to people, ancient people. For example, when Jesus is talking about, building a house on the sand versus a house on the rock, people would be laughing because nobody would build their house on the sand. Yeah. People would be laughing about just thinking about that possibility. But then Jesus comes and says, hey, but you can be doing that spiritually. Yeah. Or, for example, the parable of the sower. A sower went out to sow. And he just was spreading, precious seed in the rocks. On the wayside. People would be laughing because, like, what farmer would he would just get his seed and just throw it in the middle of the rocks? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of sense of humor in the teachings of Jesus. Yeah, exactly. So I don't think that sense of humor is incompatible.
And not only that, but like, humor and laughing produces oxytocin, it produces dopamine. Like, it actually makes us feel good. It helps our immune system. It helps our relationships with other people. Like, it's oftentimes that the people that you love the most will be the people that you also laugh a lot with. Like, it is fun. It's an enjoyable thing to be with people and to laugh. If you never laughed, it'd just be everything be too serious all the time. And if life is too serious and you're stressed out, it makes you sick. It actually does. That's proven. So to that, I would say, laugh, enjoy life, laugh, have fun.
I agree.
You're listening to the Breakfast Show podcast on Faith FM. Positively different.
Now going to get the answer to the quiz question. So please, producer Shao, what is it that you were asking before? What is it in Revelation 18, verse 4?
The answer to that was, come out of her, my people. Mm-hmm. Or I like how Elliot wrote it, just leave.
Yes, just get out of there.
Short handwriting. Leave.
Yeah,
that's right. It's a
nice.
Great call to leave that idolatry and wickedness and to come to Jesus instead.
Yeah. Fall in love with Jesus, not Babylon.
All right. I want to talk to you about the battle between the tech bros and Pope Leo. Are you ready for that one?
I'm ready.
Okay. So be ready for that one. This is an interesting one. Just this past week, Pope Leo, he published his first major encyclical. Encyclical is like an official document by the Pope. Okay. Reading his authority. This is like doctrine.
Okay.
Right. It's called Magnifica Humanitas, which is in Latin means humanity is magnificent. And of course, it's all about AI. That's Pope Leo's favorite topic.
Okay.
And it is also, don't think coincidentally, it's in the 135th anniversary of the papal encyclica called Rerum Novarum, like New Things, which was an encyclica written by his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII, that, during kind of the Industrial Revolution, where it's talking about the importance of safeguarding human dignity and so on. And it helped to shape the working laws in many countries around the world.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying, hey, we should not explore people. They're not slaves. They're not machines. They're not animals. They're not beasts of burden. They're like people just like you with dignity, and we need to treat them like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So now he came up. So now Pope Leo XIV published his encyclical, where he's dealing mainly with AI. It's about 60 pages long, 42,000 words. It's available on the Vatican website for those of you who are interested. But I'm going to give you a rundown of what's inside.
Okay.
And then we're going to be talking about how does that connect to the Antichrist
Interesting.
verses in the Bible. So he starts with an introduction, and he basically says that we as humanity, we are at a crossroads.
Yeah.
We can, either now AI, he says, look, it's a very disruptive technology, and we can either use it to build something like the Tower of Babel, which is something really ambitious and unregulated that will cause ultimately our ruin, or we can use AI to create a new Jerusalem.
Yeah, interesting.
And create a world that AI is used for education and health and advancements and so on.
Yeah.
And he's basically challenging, okay, which world are we wanting to create? Again, he goes on he has 5 chapters and then a conclusion. In chapter 1, he talks about how should we judge technology according to Catholic teaching. So they say, look, when we're looking at technology, we have to look at 4 basic things, like, is it promoting human dignity? Is it promoting the common good? Is it promoting solidarity? In other words, now are we accumulating power in the hands of a few, or are we including everyone? Making sure that everyone is benefiting from it.
Yeah.
And then subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is an interesting concept, saying is technology controlled by one person calling the shots and they're using technology, or it's like technology is in the hands of everyday people and they're the ones having autonomy to use it however it's best.
Yeah, interesting.
So it's actually some good principles there.
I think so, yeah.
So he's marking that up and says, look, we should evaluate technologies through those lenses. I think it's interesting. Then chapter 2, he talks about human dignity in the age of artificial intelligence. And he basically says, look, AI is posing some big threats to reduce the dignity of people by reducing people to data. So to them, in the mind of AI firms and softwares and so on, you and I, we're just data. Because that's what AI does.
Yeah.
AI works with data. So basically reducibility is just a bunch of data. And then policymakers will make decisions based on you not as a person, but you as who your data tells you who you are.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a very interesting point.
Yeah.
And then he talks about the danger of letting algorithms make moral decisions. So he was kind of getting advanced there and saying, look, we should not let algorithms make decisions. For example, use lethal AI-led weapons, make decisions to take life, or let the AI to decide if you should go to jail or not. Have you thought about that?
Yeah,
that
that's
once
kind of
AI
scary
comes to the
thought.
judicial systems, the judges can be looking at it and say, okay, look at what Elliot has done, compared with like which laws he has broken, and suggest to me an adequate penalty for him. And then the AI comes and says, yes, for Elliot's crime of releasing gas in the studio and and almost killing Skafy and Shell is like 5 years sentence. He says, look, we should not go that route. We should not let AI make these big executive decisions, moral decisions, because they don't have a conscience.
I would agree with that.
Right? So that's a good point.
Yeah.
Then he goes into the most interesting chapter
Okay.
of all in his encyclical, which is chapter 3, the most concrete one. Chapter 3, it's entitled Safeguarding Truth, Work, and Freedom in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And he's basically saying, look, these are the big 3 risks. Number 1, deep fakes. Deep fakes, fake videos and fake news. AI is generating that. This is destroying truth.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the first risk. Second risk, AI replacing or devaluing human work.
Yeah.
And you've seen, for example, Oracle laying off like 30,000 people in one day. There's a guy, Atlassian, which is an Australian-owned massive big tech company. It's $1 billion company.
Yeah.
They just laid off like I think 8,000 people as well. And then actually there's like one of their engineers just went online and just released all of the architecture of how their softwares work. So now anybody can create that for free.
Interesting.
You just go to your AI agent.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm giving the recipe here to make someone a millionaire today. Just say, Claude, replicate a website equal to that one. Make no mistakes. Here is the video that you should reference to. You don't even need to know what it's talking about.
Yeah.
Basically, you can ask AI to teach you these things. In Ukraine, for example, it came a report last month, in the month of March. March 2026. Do you know how many casualties, or how many of the casualties that the Ukrainian army inflicted in Russian soldiers were done by AI-powered drones?
How many?
96%.
Whoa!
So 96% of all Russian soldiers that died in March, they died because of drone
They were
attack.
killed from robots.
And a lot of these drones that the Ukrainian armies are using, they already are AI capable to identify the target and just go there and destroy.
That's some serious stuff.
So we're not talking about a distant utopian future. We're talking about something that's happening right now. And then the Pope says the third risk is mass surveillance eroding personal freedom. Saying, look, AI can be used for mass surveillance and erode personal freedom, and we won't have freedom, basically, in this world. Then chapter 4, he's basically saying, look, should we, concentrate the power of AI in the hands of few, or do we want to create a world where technology is serving the dignity of all? So he called it the civilization of love versus the culture of power. And then he basically, in chapter 5, he explores how AI can actually reduce inequality, protect the environment, help build genuine human flourishing, and so on. And he basically calls, governments to regulate AI in companies, so that they can act responsibly. Okay. And right next to Pope, when the Pope was reading his encyclica, right next to him, he had an executive from Anthropic, which is one of the world's most advanced AI, and the Anthropic guy said, look, we need people like the Pope to help us regulate, because the industry itself, we won't be able to regulate.
Yeah.
So basically, that's the Pope's stance on AI. He doesn't talk anything about the second coming of Jesus. He talks about creating the New Jerusalem in the here and now. It was not very much a theological, actually, even though there's some references to the Bible. It was not very much theological encyclical, this one.
Yeah,
and he doesn't mention anything about the Antichrist. But then you have Peter Thiel, who is one of the main tech bros, one of the greatest in tech billionaires. He's the founder of Palantir Technologies, which is the most important company that provides software services for the Pentagon. These are the AI company that helps the military to identify targets and strike, for example.
Yeah.
And he basically says, no, the Antichrist is actually going to be calling for regulation on AI. Because through regulation and AI, it can create a one world government. Because he's going to be promising peace and safety. This is one of the passages of the Antichrist. He's going to be offering peace and safety to everyone.
Yeah.
So Pope Leo says, look, if you don't regulate AI, it can lead to mass surveillance, which can lead to the Antichrist ruling.
Interesting.
The tech bro says, no, if you regulate AI, that's going to lead to the Antichrist ruling, because the Antichrist is all about control and regulation.
Yeah, wow.
So basically, Peter Thiel is pointing at the Pope and saying, you are the Antichrist. The Pope is pointing at Peter Thiel, so no, you are the Antichrist. And who's the Antichrist here in that story? And look, my 2 cents is this. The Antichrist can actually be benefiting from both. I actually think that the Antichrist will allow this technology to develop.
Yeah.
But then have a speech that will be very seductive to the multitude, saying we have to regulate it. Because a lot of people are having a great angst against AI at the moment.
Yeah.
Because of the job losses and so on and so forth. So I think that what these two men were ignoring is the fact that the Antichrist will come. Well, the Antichrist is already here, according to the Bible. And the scenario that we see in Revelation 13, where people will be controlled what they buy or sell based on how they worship. Well, AI I believe, is going to play a big role into defining who's who.
Yeah.
So my point to both of them is that, hey, the Antichrist can actually benefit from both scenarios.
Yeah.
Both from unregulated AI that leads to mass surveillance, and from a global movement push to, hey, let's regulate that. But I would even say that probably saying with your mouth that we should regulate, but in actuality, surveilling people anyway.
Yeah.
En masse. And that's, I think, that the piece that both the Pope and Peter Thiel were not taking into account.
You're listening to the Breakfast Show podcast on Faith FM. Positively different.
And Now we're going to have an interview with Maria Andrioli. She's our psychologist, and she's with us every fortnight, and she's going to be answering some questions around obsessive compulsive disorder, including what are some common misconceptions and what are obsessions, what are compulsions, and how do we navigate that. Maria, thank you very much for talking to us today. This is a fascinating topic, and I believe that OCD is an acronym that everybody has talks about it in one point or the other.
Hey, Skafy. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And you're right. It's pretty common to hear people saying quite often that they have OCD, which is pretty interesting. And I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about what OCD actually is. A lot of people seem to think that it's simply just liking things really clean and organized. You might have a friend who's, always cleaning, always ordering, and they're like, oh, I'm so OCD,
Yes.
which is related to OCD, but kind of a little off the mark.
Okay. Yes. Look, I absolutely heard that. Like, oh, I have a bit of an OCD here. I need to have my space really, really clean and neat all the time. So what is the real OCD? What is it that, when a psychologist is like diagnosing people with OCD, what is it exactly that you're looking for?
Yeah, so as you said before, OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, meaning there needs to be two things that a person is having. They need to be having obsessions. Now, obsessions are intrusive thoughts. They could be images, fears, urges that just unwanted come into your mind. Some examples are like, what if I left the stove on? Could be fears like that. But it could also be intrusive thoughts about hurting other people, or about doing odd things. So those are obsessions. You need that. And you also need compulsions. So a compulsion is an action, or it could be a thought as well, which is confusing. But it's basically something that you think or do to feel certain again, or to stop the obsession from happening. And compulsions can be things like checking, washing, counting, but it's different to just, I need my house tidy and ordered. It's the belief like, if I don't order things in this exact way, then that obsession is going to happen. So for example, if I don't order these books in this way, this person's going to die. Now that's just one very specific example, but it's got to follow that kind of pattern. And for it to be OCD, like it really needs to be taking over a person's life. And OCD can be really debilitating.
I once met a young lady, and I imagined that at the time that she probably had OCD because one of the things that she would always be washing her hands, and when she was washing her hands, was not just washing her hands; she was washing her hands for like 10 minutes at a time, and very constantly. Her hands were actually quite hurt because of all of that, the friction that she's generating on them. Is that a common expression of OCD, for example, the repetitive washing of hands?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, repetitively washing hands on its own does not mean OCD straight away. It could be a few different things going on there, but it's definitely a big sign. And as a psychologist, we would ask the person, if you don't wash your hands, what might happen? Right? And then that opens up the conversation, and we may find that they are also having obsessions, and the washing the hands is to stop the obsessions from happening. And in that case, and with how often you've described it's happening, is often obviously affecting her life, right? So then at that point, that is sounding like OCD.
So what are some common symptoms of OCD that you see, or that psychological literature identifies? Is there some things that are particularly common, or in each person the OCD will manifest in different ways?
Yeah, look, I guess some common ones could be, when it comes to the obsessions, there could be obsessions about causing harm to other people. And I really need to say that this doesn't mean that the person wants to hurt other people, but they keep having these intrusive thoughts that they are going to hurt other people. And this is one that I've seen in my work a lot. And it's really obviously distressing for the person having those thoughts. It can feel awful to have those intrusive thoughts. And then compulsions can, come in all sorts of different forms, things like, I need to step on 5 leaves on the way home, or I'm going to hurt that person, or I need to count to 10, 5 times. So like that's just, I guess it can look so different, you know, for different people. I've seen so many different ways that it shows up, but what we're really looking for is like the presence of obsessions and compulsions.
And then what are the things that aggravate that these compulsions or these obsessions, and what are some of the things that actually help?
Yeah, that's a good question. What aggravates it? Because, you know, something that's important to kind of raise here, which is related to your question, is the fact that everyone gets intrusive thoughts. And people with OCD are usually surprised to learn that, you know, we all get those weird thoughts that just pop up in our heads out of nowhere. You know, they can be very odd, but for the most part, you know, when we get those thoughts, we might just think something like that was weird and move on. So everyone gets intrusive thoughts, but with OCD, it's different. You get the thought and you don't just think that was weird and move on. You begin to attach a meaning to the thought. Things like, you know, why did I think that? Or what if this means something? Or does thinking this make me a bad person? And they begin to really dwell and kind of spiral into that. And then that's when the compulsions might begin. So the things that they do to try to reduce that anxiety, to try to feel certain again. So it's not necessarily the presence of obsessions or intrusive thoughts, which, you know, leads to OCD, but it's the meaning you attach to the thought. And so absolutely allowing, you know, yourself to be really distressed by those intrusive thoughts, or to really think that it makes you a bad person. Defining yourself by your thought can be a big thing that makes OCD worse. That's one of the big ones. Of course, with OCD, just like any other mental health condition, is stress. So people with OCD, like, it usually comes in waves. It can be really bad for a period of time and then it can settle down. And obviously stress can be a big part of what makes OCD worse. I guess that's like any mental health condition, really. Yeah. So I would say stress and, I suppose, shame, or the meaning that the person is attaching to their thoughts.
That's interesting because stress ends up affecting so many things, doesn't it? Maria, what about for families that live with relatives or people nearby that have OCD? What can they do? Because I imagine that it can be quite challenging for them too, wouldn't it?
Extremely challenging, extremely. And I don't think people actually realize how debilitating OCD can be. You know, when it's even just like a moderate to severe form of OCD, it can absolutely take over a person's life. OCD can also just come out of nowhere. Like, a person may not have it at all, and then it may develop. So it can come on quite suddenly too. And for family members, it can be exhausting. One of the compulsions, so remember, compulsions are the actions a person takes to relieve the obsessions. One of the compulsions someone with OCD often does, it might not just be counting or checking or washing, but it can be things like excessive reassurance seeking or confessing. So reassurance seeking is like asking someone, like, are you sure I didn't hurt someone? Are you sure I didn't poison something? Are you sure I didn't do this? And confessing is like the need to almost confess what they've done, even if they haven't actually done it, but it's related to the obsession. So these are things that, as a family member of someone with OCD, that person is going to be coming to you quite a lot with the need for reassurance, with confessing, and that can be exhausting, especially if it's taking over conversations. So look, I just really want to validate any family members, you know, and just say that you're seen. Well, I understand. I see you. I see how hard this can be. And I guess you are needing a lot of understanding and compassion, really, to be able to support this person. But it's also important to recognize that you can't support them alone. I would really encourage those family members to, you know, get that person some help, because it's not something that can be solved on its own, on your own. And I would also say that you don't need to give into the cycle of reassurance seeking. And this is true of OCD, but also anxiety in general, that if we're constantly providing reassurance, we're actually strengthening the OCD or the anxiety, because we're taking away that person's ability to cope with uncertainty, because we're trying to offer them reassurance and certainty every time. But it's actually important that the person learns to manage that without needing reassurance.
Well, that is actually quite amazing, and even from a spiritual perspective, Maria, I'm thinking here from the perspective of a gospel worker, which is my case here. You know, if the pastor, for example, he's the one always providing hope and reassurance, he can actually make someone that is struggling with anxiety to become dependent on that person, to be, instead of going to Jesus, for example, or going to the Bible to find that reassurance in the words of Jesus, not in the words of people. So I can see a similar phenomenon of even in let's say in religious and spiritual matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's a really cool point there. And I think it's just true of everything in general. Like God wants us to be whole people, not to be dependent on each other. And the sad thing with mental health is it does make the person very vulnerable and very at risk of becoming dependent on others. But it's not the answer. It's not the way forward.
And Maria, in your experience, you know, have you seen like this religion or someone's spirituality impact if they have OCD, either negatively or positively? What are some things that you have observed in that area where religion and spirituality may play a role in OCD, either as a positive thing, as a support, or as something that actually makes it even worse?
So, look, first of all, the research shows that for many people, for the most part, unless they've had some religious trauma, you know, religion, being part of a church community, having hope, all of these things are really protective factors against any mental health disorder, right? As in general. I don't know about OCD specifically, but I mean, it's included as a mental health disorder, right? But I will say though that religion can affect, I wouldn't say that it's not that it affects OCD in a bad way, but it's more so that if you have religious beliefs, that might show up in your compulsions. So a common compulsion that we see with religious people is compulsive praying. And I don't mean just praying without ceasing, because that's a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean this, you know, like if they have this obsession, they might think, oh, I need to pray in this very certain way 3 times or something bad's going to happen. So look, it certainly manifests in the types of compulsions, you know, that a person might have. But, I wouldn't say that means it's making it worse. You know, I think it just shows up because that's part of the belief, right? Mm-hmm. But for the most part, having, you know, a religious community, a supportive religious community, is a huge protective factor. Because as we know, stress increases OCD and isolation causes stress.
Absolutely. Yes. No, that's so interesting. And I noticed that there's a pattern there that unless I do this and this and that, something bad will happen. And I think this is an underlying thought behind obsessive compulsive behavior. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, yeah, when I was thinking also about the role of religion, because I think that there are healthy expressions of religion and there's unhealthy expressions of religion. When you mentioned about how shame, for example, can compound on the negative effects of OCD, I'm thinking that sometimes when religion is not presented in a biblical way or in an accurate way, it can be quite toxic in that area of shame. And I thought that that part of false shame or false guilt could contribute negatively towards it. So I think that the answer to that would be a balanced view and a healthy view of religion instead of a distorted one.
Absolutely. I love that. And you just made me think as well, like part of some of the obsessive thoughts that a person might have, can be obsessive thoughts about sinful things, you know, without getting too specific, mm-hmm. right? And so the person can begin to have a lot of shame about the fact that they're having those thoughts, and then that can manifest into compulsions over time. And you know, if we think about that in toxic religious circles, you know, where they're taught that, you know, having these thoughts makes you an inherently bad person, you can see how that could really lead to OCD developing. I mean, that's a really big statement, maybe not lead to it, but you know what I'm trying to say here.
Yes.
But I guess if we have like a healthy Christian, you know, belief and an accurate belief, we begin to see that there's a difference between temptations, which I guess you could also in one way call obsessions, you know, and being sinful, right? You can, we know that Jesus was tempted and yet he did not sin. And that's really healthy for someone with OCD to understand, is that your obsessions do not make you bad. You know, the thoughts that just pop up into your mind are not a reflection of who you are. You know, and there's a difference between having a temptation and actually falling into a pattern of acting on your thoughts. And I think that's really important to have that healthy concept of Christianity.
Maria, thank you so much. This was so enlightening to me. I mean, having this conversation about OCD with a psychologist. Thank you so much for sharing. And of course, if you have any questions to Maria, you can text us here 0491 064 669.
Thanks for being a part of the Faith FM family. Join our community on Facebook or get in touch at 1-800-FAITH-FM.